Welcome to another episode of Into the Hemaverse, your guide for everything going on in the Hemaverse. As always, I'm Colin Vredenberg and joined by my co-hosts David Rao,
hey,
and Nathan Graperes. Hey, how's it going, guys? Another week.
it's good.
Same for me. Same for David, I imagine. Yeah, we don't have laws here, so we're just running around like everything's fine.
Yeah, I mean, everything is fine, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yes.
Absolutely.
And sorry. Well, we've got a great episode today. We will be talking about Rapier, which is the other HEMA category. We've already done Longsword, and so this week we're going to talk a little bit about Rapier. Specifically,
those are the only two.
Yeah, I was going to say the other.
Only two. Yeah. Statistically speaking.
You do one. You do Longsword or you do Rapier.
That's right. You do one or the other, and let's face it, you probably do Longsword.
Rapier is just complex hilted single-handed longsword, so.
That's true. They're like pretty much the same weight. They're pretty much the same length. I mean, they're just all swords, right? They're just all swords.
You can even hold them in one hand, two hands.
That's true. You can hold them in two hands, and many times it has been done.
So really, if you want to learn about the Rapier, just go watch our Longsword video.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. Well, before we actually get into our rehashing of the Longsword video, we should do some news. We got some old news and some new news and some... Nope, that's it. Old news and new news. So the old news, HEMA Bookshelf is still running, which is awesome. So if you haven't gotten a chance to sign up or back the facsimiles of both Lacushner and Fiore's Flower of Battle, those are still available. It's $175 for one, which is actually kind of a good deal, and then two of them I think together is $350, $375, something like that. But yeah, if you...
Did you say Lacushner?
Yeah, wasn't it Lacushner?
No, Talhofer was the one.
Talhofer. I messed it up. I'll have to cut that entire section out.
I think he's working on Lacushner.
Yeah, I think so.
Talhofer is the one that's running before.
Okay. I was also kind of we have a guest for next week lined up that would probably love to talk about Lacushner. That's gonna be a fun one. Can't wait to talk to him again. So yeah, HEMA Bookshelf, or we'll put the link up in the description and show you a little bit on screen as usual. The next thing is David, as of last week, right after we stopped filming, was able to get his HEMA coaching Facebook site up, which is awesome. So, David, tell us a little bit about your The HEMA Coach page.
Yeah, so it's easy to find. It's facebook.com/thehemacoach. There's not much up there yet because, you guys may know, I was sick for like 2 months, so I had a lot of stuff planned for it that I haven't had a chance to put together, videos and things like that. But I've just started posting a little content, and basically it's going to be educational content. So sometimes that will be a post or like a blog post or videos, dank memes.
Yeah, I was gonna say I fed you a lot of memes.
Yeah, there are some memes coming. Thanks to Colin. They're glorious. And just discussion, as well as just if you're interested in like private lessons or working with me, coaching wise, that's the place or the way to contact me.
Yeah, and
Facebook.com/thehemacoach.
I would highly recommend, if you are looking for any online coaching. He's kind of good. He's good at what he does. Next up is in the news is a cool video game that I've been kind of messing around with a little bit. Hellish Quart, which is on Steam right now in like an early access kind of deal. It's supposed to be a very HEMA based I guess it's fighting game because it's two people on the. So I would say, yeah, this is like a fighting game kind of button masher, but it has some pretty interesting sword play as far as, you know, just cool stuff. There's feints and different guards. Right now I think they're really concentrating on saber, but they apparently are going to be adding longswords and rapiers and other stuff later. So yeah, if it's really cool.
I think they have rapiers in.
They did? Oh man.
Yeah.
When I was doing the demo or whatever, it was
in
just
the
saber.
Maybe it's only in the. They have a demo video that has rapier in it.
Oh yeah. So the video definitely has the rapier, and I think there's one person doing longsword in it. But for some reason, yeah, it's I guess they'll add that later. The saber mechanics are what they're trying to get down, I guess. I think the company itself is Eastern European, so it kind of makes sense that they would focus on saber first. Cool. The last thing is the last piece of old news. We're still working on that AMA, which is an Ask Me Anything for those of you that don't know. An Ask Me Anything that we will be trying to do live, probably first week in November. We're working on it, but we need excess questions. So we're going to probably give priority to live questions, but if it happens to be like kind of dead, we're going to take questions. And then obviously if you submitted your questions, you can look at the VOD later and you'd be able to, you know, get your question answered. But it is literally ask us anything, and we're going to have to try to answer it to the best of our ability. So that means all the theory questions are going to be going to you two. But yeah, so please submit.
I'll throw them to David. He can have it.
So please.
We're going to be doing it in international waters, so the Fifth Amendment doesn't apply.
You guys. Yes, we're going to be doing it in international waters. I don't think so. But if you want to submit questions, the two ways to do it are to our email address, which is intothehemaverse@gmail.com, or you can comment your question into this YouTube video and we will get to it. Cool. So that's it for the news. Let's talk about fencing, guys. And specifically rapier fencing. I'm going to start it off and say this is my favorite event. Rapier is kind of what I'm all about. I love that fancy crap. It's definitely an influence growing up with Princess Bride. It's literally the reason. There's no other reason. But yeah, and it's funny because I'm the only one that hasn't placed well in a rapier event out of the three of us. You guys are like winning tournaments, and I'm like, I'm all about rapier, and you're like, that's cute. So
I believe you. You would have won
blowing
things
out your knee doesn't help.
if you hadn't torn your ACL.
no, I wouldn't have. You absolutely not. I
I
probably
know, I was lying.
I would
but-
have been kicked out in like the first round of elims. I also so talking about my experience with rapier. The other thing is I have had notoriously bad luck and have gotten the gold medalist first round in elims every single tournament that I have competed in. Literally every time.
See,
Get that
was-
indicator up.
Did they already win that tournament when you were fighting them, or had they not won yet?
They were the last year's either silver or gold medalist, and then went on to win gold in that tournament.
So it's kind of like you gave them an assist. So that's cool.
No, I was just the lowest ranked, and they were just pairing me up with them. Yeah, I assisted. That was that's. Oh, that hurts.
Honestly, you should get like an honorary gold medal to go along with it.
No.
They couldn't have done it without you.
Right.
You guys are the worst. I'm gonna cry. All right, so what's your experience with rapier, guys?
David, you go first.
Sure. So I've done rapier since 2001, 2002, something like that. I got started doing HEMA literally when I was 13, back in 2000, and I was doing longsword, sort of. It wasn't quite HEMA then, it wasn't. But we had like a longsword program and a rapier program, and I didn't really care that much about the rapier. And then I went and saw a live production of Hamlet, that the stage like combat, the choreography, it was ridiculously awesome. And I was like 14, and I was like, I want to do that. So I started doing the rapier class at VAF. So I've been studying Italian rapier for, oh, how long is that? 18 years, something like that. Which I should be better at it than I am now. And then since then, I've kind of branched out some into some other traditions as well. But that's mainly my primary experiences with Italian rapier, 17th century Italian rapier.
Nathan, you're up, Slugger.
So as far as my why no? As far as my experience with rapier goes, I mean, I haven't really studied any of it extensively or at all. I was at a tournament in Toluca maybe 5 years ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, some while ago, and Jake Norwood was at this tournament, and he participated in the rapier stuff, and I think he got a gold medal or a silver medal or something. And afterwards, I was like, man, Jake, I didn't know that you were good at rapier too. And he was like, I'm not. I just picked it up because it looked fun. And I was like, well, if that's a reason to do rapier, then I guess every tournament I go to, I'm going to do rapier too. And it is fun. I spar with it every now and then, just because it's a fun break from longsword. It's quite different. And I look at a little bit of instructional stuff here and there, but I don't like drill down and study any of it extensively. But that which I do look at, it's almost exclusively Destrezza stuff. In fact, one of my students has actually really taken to doing some research on Destrezza lately, and so he and I have been messing around with it and kind of going through stuff over the past few weeks. And it's a very cool way of fencing rapier. And you can also, if you do it right, you can take the principles and apply them to any weapon ever, really, which I guess is kind of the idea behind all fighting arts to begin with. But it's a very long-winded way of saying I don't study any particular sources. I just kind of like I spar with it and I have fun with it. And when I go to events that have a rapier tournament, it's my stress-free tournament, right? Like the longsword is what I spend most of my time in, and so that's the one I'm like I really, really, really want to win. Like I gotta do well because this is what I devote so much time to. But the rapier lets me fence and just
and like actually have fun.
Yeah, it's great.
It's almost as if you know how to fence, like with another sword, you can kind of pick up another sword and just apply those principles to it and do well.
Where's the hard to swallow pills meme? Oh man.
Throw it in the video.
Bam. So the first question that goes to the group is, what is a rapier? Who wants to tackle that?
Next question. I mean, I can if you want. It's actually a really, really difficult question to answer. I mean, it's almost impossible to answer it because there's a lot of different answers, and it really is kind of like more like what, like there's multiple answers. Usually when people talking about rapier, though, they're talking about a late 16th, 17th century weapon with a complex hilt, usually with a long, thin thrusting blade. But that's a modern kind of definition. At the time period, most traditions just refer to them as swords, and there's weapons like the side sword, which is again not really a period term. Which actually I've got something like right? It's a shorter blade, wider. I mean, honestly, it's a rapier as well. And like Meyer, this guy, um, he has his rapier. He calls it, it's German, right? He calls it rapier. And again, it's closer to, if you can see there, like the weapon that I was just demonstrating.
The hilt doesn't look very complex on those.
It's not. No, it's much simpler. There's no bowl or anything covering hand. And then again, as you move into the later part of the 17th century, you start moving into what someone's called transitional rapiers, and small swords. But again, the lines are still blurry, and some forms of what we would think of as rapiers were used, especially in like Spain and Italy into the 19th century. So it's a really broad definition, but usually, like I said, it's most people are talking about the 17th century complex hilted sword with a long, thin blade that can cut, but is kind of more suited towards thrusting.
Yep, and that's pretty much how I would say it. The only thing that I would add is where the actual name comes from, which most people kind of are like, well, first of all, they're like, please make sure to pronounce this exactly correct, because if you don't pronounce it correct, we are all going to jail. But specifically, the word comes from ropero, which is Spanish, but I think it also translates in Italian. It means dress. So this is a dress sword, espada ropero. It's what you wear as like a noble person, right? It's not a sword of war specifically, because you can't really. I mean, I guess they were kind of maybe in the 80 Years' War used, but for the most part, this is more of a. At least we understand it to be more of a dueling weapon, right? It's got a pretty long blade, which, I mean, again, that's very broad. It could be anywhere from like 35 inches to 52 inches, depending on what time period you're talking about. But yeah, I think you're right. It's a complex hilted cut and thrust sword, generally speaking. So, I don't know, Nathan, did you have anything to add to that?
Oh, not really. I mean, no.
I will only add, as the resident nerd here, the ropera is the most agreed upon definition. We're not 100% sure, but that seems to be the most likely definition, that it came from dress sword.
Yeah.
It's not like there's no like linguistic like, yes, this is exactly where it is. But that seems
Oh yeah. So I you're right. I should have stipulated. That's what we kind of all agree on. There's no 100%. Oh, this definitely comes from that. We can trace it, because like that's impossible, right? You wouldn't be able to do that with anything, I don't think. But yeah.
I just wanted to get in before the YouTube commenters.
Oh, okay. And before, yeah, right. I'm learning internet speak. So actually, we already answered the second question, kind of. What time period were rapiers, quote unquote, relevant? Which David has already answered for me. It's kind of 17th. Like, yeah, I think you said early 17th century, right? Is when this is really.
No, I mean the rapier, as we think of like Italian rapier, is basically, I mean, late 16th in 17th into the 18th century.
Mm-hmm.
You still have like, at least especially with, I mean, I'm mostly talking about Italian rapier because that's kind of my area of specialty.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you have people writing treatises at the end of the 17th century, in the beginning of the 18th century, and they're still doing rapier.
Yeah, it's just kind of like and I think the other thing is we should probably just sort of say like this is a single-handed sword, like, because basically everything it's a single-handed cut and thrust. Because it's so much easier to say that and then have it transfer to everything. Like, obviously, Schiavana's, like, you could pretty much do all rapier stuff with a Schiavana. It's just your hand is a little bit safer, right? So Or you could do the same with an arming sword, as long as it's got like enough reach.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's a really good point. Like, the best way to actually think about it is not about the weapon; it's about the way they approach fencing with the weapon. So, like 17th century rapier fencing, overall, I mean, at least Italian rapier has kind of a way of approaching fencing that might have been that it is similar to but different from the 16th century approach,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the weapons that were used in the 16th century also existed in the 17th century, like
Mm-hmm.
side swords continued to be used alongside the rapier. So and you'll see variety of weapons shown in treatises.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
And
I
not
think it's
even
almost better to think about a way of using it.
one of the things that I talk about a lot, obviously, is like the 80 Years' War, because I'm really into it. But if you look at the artwork from the 80 Years' War, the Dutch War for of Revolution, I guess, or War for Independence, that's what they call it. It is, I mean, you could get anything from, like, you'll see paintings of guys with side swords. You'll see paintings with guys with schiavanas. You'll see paintings with guys with like very complex hilted fancy rapiers. It's just sort of whatever was going on. So as far as we know, yeah. For HEMA purposes, though, we should probably say this is a cut and thrust, and it's usually paired with dagger, which I always thought was very interesting. They can't just let you have your left hand open. I mean, you gotta have something. You have to have something going on, right?
If you can make your left hand into a stabby thing.
Yeah, that's very true too. So the next question: what are the main traditions of the rapier, and which ones do we study? And I think we've already answered that one. David is Italian. Nathan is studying destrezza, which is awesome. Huh? Say that again.
I said pseudo Spanish.
And I am a Tybalter through and through. And yes, I pronounce it Tybalt. It's just not going to change. I'm so sorry. David Rawlings is probably... So I've been taking lessons with David Rawlings. If he watches this video, I apologize, because he's specifically... It's Thibaut. It's Thibaut. Or Thibaut. Actually, he pronounces Thibaut. Which I always thought was funny, and now I'm like... But yeah, so those are pretty much the three... Well, you guys kind of make up the main, right? There's the Italian school of fencing that has this long and glorious tradition, and then there's the Spanish school of fencing, which has this also long and glorious tradition. And I'm kind of in the middle, weirdly enough. But David, take us through
Isn't Thibaut a descendant of Spanish fencing?
Yeah, so actually, this is... A lot of people will call it Dutch strezza,
because they used to own that part of the world. Just so you know.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what the 80 Years' War was about. I don't know if you knew that, but yeah.
And then finally, the Spaniards conceded some land.
So Tybalt's one of those weird cases because the history is basically that he was Dutch, but his name is his family name was Danvers. He's very Dutch, but for some reason he took he took his mother's French name and used it more often. And then as a young man, he traveled to Spain to learn from, I think it was Dorada, specifically Dorada. So he went to Spain to learn destrezza, and then decided destrezza is cool, but I'm gonna make it my own thing. And there's definitely like parts of it that are very Italian, like he keeps in the Doradas a lot, and like so it's kind of a weird mix between the two. But I would say primarily destrezza with like some other things thrown in.
Yeah, and there are other traditions. There's a French tradition, which unfortunately we don't have a lot of. There's only a few treatises.
Mm-hmm.
In existence, much fewer than like Italian, especially like Italian. There's tons of stuff. There's also German rapier, which if you're looking at like Maya from the end of the latter part of the 16th century, that's what we would think of as side sword, but again, it's rapier.
Mhm.
Then actually, kind of interesting thing. By the time you get to the 17th century, Germans were like, "Oh, Italian rapier, especially Fabris, is really cool." So then you have a whole bunch of treatises written in German using Italian terminology and teaching like Fabris's system and related systems.
Yeah. So as far
There's also English rapier as well, but we don't talk about that.
Who's that?
yeah, that's an interesting one because there's definitely like it's almost as if Italian rapier is kind of the main tree of evolution, right? It's kind of like this, the trunk of the tree of rapier evolution would be Italian, right? And it starts with, actually I don't know, would you say that the base of the tree would be like Agrippa or like?
So that's usually, people point to Agrippa as being like the first rapier treatise.
Mm-hmm.
Italian rapier treatise. I need to remember when he wrote that.
Yeah, I don't remember either, honestly. Editing.
Yeah, it's actually, give me 2 seconds. So he wrote his treatise in, it's 16th century. Yeah, I don't have it here. 1553.
Oh, okay, so that was pretty early, yeah.
His first one at least. It's also kind of universally, not universal, but people kind of like don't really study Agrippa because it's not that great of a, I mean, it's not, it was kind of the first one, but the sources that came after it that were kind of using his same system where he like numbered the guards first, second, third, fourth, they do a better job of explaining it than he did and expand upon it. So a lot of people, while it's an important treatise, a lot of people don't really study that compared to
so
other,
so what you're saying is the enemy hasn't studied his Agrippa.
they shouldn't.
It was coming some point, like it's going to be more just
I was waiting for it.
yeah. Yeah, so like, but that's usually looked at, he's usually looked at as like the start of rapier, even though I think that the Bolognese side sword is probably like,
yeah, I mean he's really just taking the Bolognese system and streamlining it, honestly. And I mean that's a simplification, but like there's way more overlap between them than people. I mean it's wrong to see them as completely separate systems, although they are different.
yeah. So it seems to me though that Italian tradition is kind of the trunk of the tree, and then you have like offshoots, right? A very early offshoot, I would say, almost like a second trunk, would be like the Spanish, who seem to latch on to some of the things that Agrippa said, specifically with regard to mathematics and maybe a little bit of the mysticism in there that definitely Tybalt kind of latched onto. But they take that mathematics and they kind of run with it. Whereas the Italians had like this long tradition, and I think that probably the two most common ones, or the ones that most people have probably heard of, would be Capoferro and Salvator Fabris. Would you kind of agree with that?
Sorry, your mic cut out for me.
Oh no, it did.
I heard Fabris.
Yeah. So I said the two main Italians that Italian schools or studies would mostly single out Capoferro and Salvator Fabris.
Yeah, I mean that's at least who people usually have heard of. Although I what I call kind of the big four is Fabris, Capoferro, Alfieri, and Giganti.
Oh, okay.
Who are all writing in basically the up, like Alfieri I think is the latest in like 1640. But they're all doing Italian rapier, and they're all doing more or less the same thing. Although Fabris is a little bit more. Fabris is kind of the oddball. Because he does everything else that they do, but then he has, but this is how you should read it.
Yeah, he has the
Um,
those special guards and other things there.
Right. So and then people think of him as really different. He actually does basically everything else that they do. He just has a more specific way he wants you to approach it. But yeah,
Mhm.
those I'd say are the kind of the big four. But yes, like almost everyone's heard the term Cup of Pharaoh.
Mhm. All right. So let's move right along then. So for someone who is a beginner, how would you begin learning Rapier? Nathan, you teach
Learn
Rapier.
Spanish.
Learn Spanish. That's one way to go about it.
I mean,
Nathan, what do you teach your beginners, Nathan?
I don't teach Rapier.
You don't teach Rapier at all?
No.
Oh, okay.
No,
Well-
so I can't really answer your question.
Man.
But I mean, honestly, I would say if you have experience with other weapons, just spar with it. Spar with it, become familiar with it. And honestly, even if you really don't, spar with it anyways, and just kind of find a friend or whatever, and just pick up a rapier and just go at it and try and figure out what kind of motions work, what kind of motions don't work, and then from there, from what I have heard from David and others, Fabris is a very complete and like informative system. And I imagine that if you have a basic understanding of how you move with the rapier, you could probably do a pretty passable job at reading Fabris and working through the plays.
Go for it, David. How do you start your Rapier students?
Well, so I mean, there's
First of all, he has them.
I have several answers to the question. Obviously, as always, if you want to get started and you have a coach nearby who does Rapier, go learn from them and do whatever they do. If you're doing this more on your
Preach,
own,
brother.
or you are, you don't have access to anything else. I actually find the like Nathan said, if you just have some people who want to fence, like just start fencing with them, and you're gonna figure out a bunch of stuff. Just your distance and timing is mostly gained through fencing, and through games like that. Like you're not gonna learn how to control distance and attack at the right time by drilling a technique over and over again, because you got to be moving and have that randomness. I actually find the best place to start for beginners, if you want to do Italian Rapier, is Giganti. His first book is just laid out in a very, here's how you stand, here's how you lunge, here's how you thrust, here it's so it's a good place, like if you want to do a self-study, that's a great way. And then my last answer is, if you have no other people around you that do Rapier, do HEMA or anything like that, and but you do have a fencing school, go and learn foil or epee, because there's more similarities than there are differences. It comes from the same tradition. It developed out of it. You'll learn distance timing. You're going to learn the basic idea of parry, riposte, and then you can apply that really easily to Rapier. And then so if you do that, and then you it's anytime I'm teaching, if I have someone who has a sport fencing background, they'll pick up Rapier literally, I show them, this is how you parry. They're like, oh, we do it a little bit different, but I get it, it's the same. So those are I think my three answers to the question.
And now David is teaching online lessons.
Yeah.
So there you go.
So you have to coach anywhere as long as you have a computer.
That's true. I have one big recommendation that helped me a lot is, obviously I had a coach, right? It's that guy or that guy. I had a coach. That was great. But one of the things that definitely helped me, because I actually struggled with it despite being a sport fencer guy, I still struggled a lot with it. What helped me a lot is I put together this YouTube playlist of Italian rapier that's specifically concentrated on Fabris, because that's again, he's one of the big four, but also kind of the one that I think most people should probably be most familiar with, because it's so easy. It's a very easy to understand treatise to read, and it's very complete, which I think Nathan already said, but David has said multiple times. There is an entire, from Martin Fabian, I think he has an entire like Learn Rapier series, right? And then Martin Janacina has a whole series on Fabris's rapier and dagger, which is super helpful. And then at the end of the YouTube playlist, I have them two fighting at the Turnhow 2019 event, which is just basically, if you watch that fight, it is a masterclass in Italian rapier, or specifically Fabris rapier. So I would definitely recommend that, and I'll put a link to it in the description. It is one of my favorite playlists to pull up and watch. Cool.
Just real quickly on that fight, if you watch it, so a lot of times once you get to the high levels, actually the fencing overall, like the fencers are really, really good, but because there's so much that goes into it, sometimes the fencing level, it simplifies and it's actually not as pretty to watch. It's much easier to just own noobs than it is to own someone who's as good as you.
Mm-hmm.
But that particular match is gorgeous. Like,
yeah, really.
You're doing like it's fantastic. Like it's really, really high level. It's executed really, really well. It's great.
And they're so fast. Like, one of the things that so I've watched that fight probably 6 times at least, and I'm gonna probably go watch it after this video, or after this recording. Each time I watch it, I try to pick up something different. Like, I try to concentrate on something different. I'm like, I'm gonna concentrate on Fabian's dagger hand, or I'm gonna concentrate on Janacina's footwork specifically, and just watch their footwork. So. And each time I'm like not disappointed, because I'll catch something that I didn't catch before. And also, I would also like to point out, YouTube has a frame by frame option. It is the comma key and the period key, and that will help you a lot in your watching of that. All right, so moving on. I think we covered already what kind of instruction is out there. I think we already covered what other material is helpful for learning rapier, because I think we would all agree that any single-handed sword material is incredibly helpful. I would say Bolognese side sword is definitely helpful. I'm trying to think of like some other things. Small sword.
Small sword.
Yeah.
French small sword is, again, everything. Small sword is just a smaller set of techniques.
Swords.
Like, they're smaller swords. Thank you, Nathan. But
That low-hanging fruit.
There's
go
no
for it.
technique. There is no technique in French small sword that does not exist in rapier. There's just less. Like, you don't cut with a small sword unless it's a spadrine. But we don't talk about spadrines.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're interested in Spanish, Destreza, we have a whole episode on it. You can check it out. With some cool recommendations, and we talked to a really cool guy. Oh, interesting. I'd added this, but I forgot that it was in there. What exercises might be helpful to strengthen arms and legs? And rapier, I have a feeling we're going to concentrate on arms and wrist. What do you guys think? Exercises.
I actually saw, I don't remember who posted it. It was a couple weeks ago. Somebody posted a video of them doing some rapier exercises where they took a resistance band and they were holding it with their left hand down by their hip, and they fed it over their back and then around this hand here. Mm-hmm. So like they got a resistance band and they're just thrusting with the rapier with the resistance band on their hip to build up strength much more efficiently than just doing a bunch of thrusts with a rapier. That's
a fantastic one. I've actually seen that for sport fencing as well. So. But yeah, that's a good one. David, I know you want to weigh in on this.
Sure. I mean, so for arms, like what Nathan mentioned there. Also, if you're practicing thrusts, it's always preferable to practice them on a target rather than, I mean, not always, but it's almost always preferable to practice them on a target, because when you're thrusting and you hit a target, you get resistance, and you have to continue extending. Whereas if you just thrust against the air, you're not getting the feel of actually hitting anything.
Mm.
So it's good to practice against the wall. And it will strengthen your arm. Just getting the resistance will help strengthen your shoulder. Any kind of pushing exercises for, getting faster, right? Push-ups, things like that. Bench press, things like that will help build your strength up for getting more explosive. And then, like forearm strengthening exercises are incredibly useful because you're gonna get tired. So you can, I mean, there's way more to go into, but look up forearm strengthening exercises and do those. Especially, it's important for all HEMA people to do exercises that work the extensor muscles. So when you do this, right, like when you're gripping a sword, you're using flexor muscles, and when you do this, you're using extensor muscles. And if you don't strengthen these muscles that extend your hand, you're going to get an imbalance of strength, which is going to cause tendonitis, because you're gripping the sword all the time, right? So, like, I don't have a rubber band in front of me. One of the easiest ones is like put a rubber band around your fingers and look up that. But if you look up forearm extensor, muscles, like there's tons of stuff on YouTube about how to strengthen that.
Yeah, I think the two big, those are the two. You had the, I went out on Amazon and I bought the ones with the little finger rings. It's basically just an elastic band. And you like, you pull it apart. And the other one I think that you had mentioned maybe back in our Distressa video was the twisting, what do you call it? The Theraband?
Yeah.
Oh man, those are great for forearm strengthening.
Actually, yes. So these right here.
Yeah, that's it.
They're like $15-20 on Amazon. I'm going to demonstrate. So you grab it. Like one of the easiest things, you grab it like this and twist it, and then let the resistance turn your wrist back and forth, and then you do it the other way. And I had this, so was having forearm issues for a long time, and I had this recommended by a physical therapist, and they're fantastic. They will fix, if you're having forearm pain, elbow pain issues, get one of those and look up on YouTube how to use them. And then as far as, so footwork with any sword is going to be important, but especially important in Rapier because
So
usually the stance is, right, your stance is usually a little bit lower, and you're usually going to be having one leg forward as opposed to changing your legs all the time, although you can change stances. So, I mean, squats, things like that will help strengthen your legs. But then the best way to improve your footwork and your leg strength and speed are games like the glove.
Oh, right. Glove fencing.
Do glove fencing, like try to hit your opponent, like with a soft glove, not with like a spec heavy. Right? You try to hit their opponent. You can't get hit, right? So if you hit them and you get hit, it doesn't count, right? So you have to hit without getting hit. So it turns into this quick back and forth where people are, and all of a sudden they learn how to control distance and timing, and then you're improving your footwork without even thinking about footwork. And there's lots of games you can do like that. And I would say for the beginner, those are more important than actual like strengthening. Like, yes, okay, once you get really into this, then we can talk about, okay, you need to do squats to build up your leg strength. But
yeah, I'm trying to think.
I don't think that's as important.
I'm trying to think who told me this, but they specifically, and it might have been you, David, but it might have been somebody else. Might have been Mariana, actually. But somebody was like, you can practice thrusts all you want, but in the typical bout, how many times do you thrust versus how many times do you step? And the answer is you might have like 8 thrusts or 8 lunges, and you're going to have like, I don't know, several hundred steps.
Yeah.
So you should probably concentrate more on the steps than the actual like arm extension thrusts. Though both are definitely
Almost sounds like Distress there, Colin.
yeah. Maybe.
But yeah,
Distress doesn't really address like lunging thrusts. It's basically just get dominance over their blade and move your feet in a particular way, and then they happen to get stabbed in the face, and now you're done.
Yeah. And Tybalt doesn't even bend his knees, so. Which, by the way, if you're a beginner and you have a trick knee, go straight to Tybalt.
oh yeah, oh yes. But that being said, everyone assumes, so if you're doing Italian Rapier and you can't get low, just don't stand low. Just bring your feet closer together. Use a modern fencing stance or even closer, because those existed as well.
Yep.
There's even straight-legged lunges in some of the sources.
Yeah, I think we talked about this, but specifically in even Fabris himself talks about. He's like, yes, this low stance is definitely better because you're making yourself a smaller target, and you're forcing your opponent basically to have good point control, right? Or have superior point control because you're getting really small, but you don't need to, right? The main thing that Fabris talks about is that, maybe I'll be able to show this, but like your shoulder is over top of your knee, and so you're kind of like at this Destreza 90-degree angle, essentially, with a body bend in it, and that's really all that.
Yeah,
he says.
Absolutely. Yeah, he says like, if you can do it this way, great. If you can't, don't.
Yeah,
which is great advice in general for him.
Yeah. All right, so again for beginners, now that you've started learning, what do you really need as far as gear is concerned? What would you say to get started?
You don't even need a rapier.
Swords and a mask.
Yeah, I mean, some sort of sword,
A stick?
mask, a glove. Yeah, although don't fence with a stick if you're doing rapier. That will end poorly. You can honestly, if you have a really low budget, get a pair of foils. Fencing foils. They're like 20. You can get them for like $25-$30.
Or even the kids' plastic foils.
Yeah, I mean, and if you have a really low budget, that's great. For fencing, now there are also budget like rapier options out there, like the Hanwei rapier, which gets a lot of bad press, but honestly, it's not that bad for a beginner. It's $150 or something like that, I think. Then just above that, you have like Castile economy rapiers, which are $200, something like that. So there's some cheaper options.
On the foil note, I just did a quick Google search, and it looks like you can get for $7 you can get some used car antennas. So
you can use those too.
That's an eBay search right there.
Done.
For fencing, you definitely want a mask. And I'm gonna say you want for I think for rapier it's actually even more important to have a jacket, and even some other weapons and a glove, because rapiers, because you're thrusting all the time, they have more likelihood of breaking and then getting stabbed, as well as they will just cut you up. I've seen people get serious gashes doing stuff without jackets on, just from a chip in the edge of the rapier, and literally slice them open, and I had to get stitches. So you don't want to be an idiot about it. And even just a basic fencing jacket, which again you can get for super cheap, gives you at least a little bit of protection. And then a good pair of shoes. Because
Ooh.
for footwork,
That's a
a
can of worms right there. Good pair of shoes.
I'm not going to talk about what kind of shoes, but just a good pair of shoes that fits well and are stable and are not going to make you slip or fall or twist your ankle.
Cool. Nathan, anything to add there?
Nope, just my car antenna comment.
Yeah, car antennas, man.
It's very helpful.
I know. Try.
So when
It hurt to get smacked with those.
it does. I had 2 older brothers. I know all about it. So when you go to buy your first steel rapier, we talked a little bit about it because you said the Hanwei ones are $150 and they're fine, and Castile's entry level, the economy line, are just above that. But what kind of features would you be looking for in a good rapier?
So you want one. This is going to sound dumb, but you want one that will work for you. So you don't want to don't get a really long rapier. Even if you're tall, and eventually you might want to move to a longer rapier, because usually you kind of want to fit the rapier to your own height to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Start with a shorter rapier because it will just be easy. It'll be lighter. It'll be easier to use. It will be less unwieldy.
And the Queen of Spain won't throw you in jail.
That's exactly right. Or cut off, snap off the end of your blade. You want a sword that's flexible, not wobbly, too wobbly. And that's actually the one problem with some of the Hanwei swords, is they can be kind of wobbly. But if your sword's really wobbly, it makes it harder to control the tip of your sword.
Mm-hmm.
And then one that's got, for a beginner especially, you want one that's got good hand protection, which is why a lot of people go with like a cup hilt style.
Mm-hmm.
Which is fine. I mean, you don't need a cup hilt. You can protect your hand without one. But for a beginner, they're great because it makes it easier to keep your hand from getting hit.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it can give you some bad habits as well if you rely on it. But
yeah. But I would say, like, to me, the like standard beginner rapier should probably be a cup hilt, just because for the most part you're not going to be able to fit your spec heavy inside of whatever rapier you're going to buy, right? So yeah, and you don't want a broken finger because you try to parry with your hand or anything like that, right? So
right,
that's definitely where I would go as well. Nathan, anything to add there?
Oh,
just to stress the point about the length of the rapier, the first rapier that I had was a dark wood rapier that was a little bit longer than probably I should have had based on my height.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, I have picked up one that's probably a good 6 inches shorter, maybe not quite 6, something like that. And it handles so much better than the longer one. It's much easier for me to use, much easier for me to manipulate, and all the things that you do when you're fencing with rapiers is a lot easier, I think.
David, you had something?
Yeah, just to bring it up, because there are multiple sources where they talk about how you should measure a rapier. Like, it should be the length, like the blade should be the length of your lunge, or it should come up to your belly button. But the one actually I like because it's just easiest for people, that is, you hold your arm out to the side, and the blade should go your armpit on this arm. That one's a really easy way to just hold it up and be like, okay, that's pretty good. And again, it's not exact, but that's a great starting point to be like, okay, this is proportional to my body.
Mm-hmm.
Because yeah, like Nathan said, you're gonna, if you have a sword that's too long, it's gonna be unwieldy.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing would just be a balance. Again, this is personal preference, but for a beginner, if the balance point is too far forward, blade's gonna feel really heavy.
Mm-hmm.
So having like a larger pommel or having more weight back will help balance it, and it will make it easier to use.
Yeah. I would definitely say that the first rapier I ever had was also too long. But there's actually another reason why I didn't like it, is because if you have a rapier that's too long for you and somebody takes your blade at the very tip, the leverage of the rapier that's a little bit too long for you is gonna just tire your hand out within like seconds, just because all of that torque that they're gonna have against you, which obviously, you know, the weak of your blade is weak and the strong of your blade. But if the longer your blade is, obviously, the more torque they're going to be able to exert onto your blade, which is another problem. It will tire your hand out so quickly in any sort of kind of binding action, right? And that's, I think that the first time I took rapier, I had a Hanwei 42 or something like that, and it was just exhausting. Yeah. All right, so next on the list,
I want to talk really quickly about grip. This just came up on online on Facebook about what is the proper way to grip the sword.
That's great because it's the Tybalt grip. No, it's not.
No.
But yeah, let's talk about grips. Obviously, when you get a sword and you're using a sword, it should be, you know, the kind of sword that plays well to the style that you're learning. You should have a Italian rapier to learn Italian and a Tybalt rapier to learn Tybalt, right? But you should also fit the grip to what you're doing, I would assume, is what you're going to.
Yes. So I'm just gonna grab a sword here. So depending on what source you're looking at, you're going to see a lot of different grips, and people will be like, you have to hold it this way. And even within sources, that's not necessarily true. So, like, I mean, this is not wrong. 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 This is not even wrong. It's like you see a variety of grips. You even see this. So there, I mean, there's a ton of different grips in the sources. So whenever someone is like, you are holding it wrong, you have to do it this way, take that with a grain of salt, because if it doesn't feel right, if it hurts your arm or your wrist, then maybe that's not the right way to grip it for you. Some rapiers, because of the way they're shaped, like, you can't hold them a certain way. Like, some rapiers have a really massive pommel, and so it actually makes it harder to hold it in a position like this. Another thing is, like, what about putting two fingers? Like, if your arm starts to get tired, that's a great way to, just whenever someone says, you have to hold the sword this way, like I said, different masters have different advice, and so always take that with a grain of salt and do it what is works best for you. Because even like with an Italian rapier, people say, "Oh, you have to have the finger over the ricasso," but I can show you hundreds of examples where that's not the case from Capoferro and from other sources.
Yeah, the same thing with like Meyer, like thumbing the blade, or there are definitely some techniques that just don't work with certain grips, but that's certain techniques, right? I think the only example of you kind of have to do the grip the way that is specifically described would be Tybalt, and the only reason is because it completely changes your blade alignment. And if your blade alignment is wrong, you're going to be thwacking people with the flat for the cuts, and that's kind of weird. But also, we probably have talked about this before, but obviously your blade doesn't bend in the same axis of your quillions. Your blade's not going to bend, right? Or bends very little, because the cutting edges of the blade that axis is very strong, whereas
Right.
the flat of the blade is very weak, right? It will bend and kind of flop around as needed. So yeah, that's a thing, and but again, it's only some techniques, right? You should still always go with comfort, I think, above.
Right.
I would love to see somebody do Tybalt with like a 2-finger grip, though. That would be exciting. Do you guys?
We all know that the one true way is.
Oh, that's true. David's preferred grip.
This is how you do it.
Yeah. Nathan's looking at his phone. He didn't see it.
People always come.
No, it's the pommel where?
You gripping the pommel. But this is something. It's funny because you see this in like épée fencing, modern Olympic épée fencing, because you get several more inches of reach, but you lose some control, right? And everyone. Well, here's the thing. Everyone complains about like that, but you have sources from the 17th century complaining about people doing that too. Like, don't do this. So there's nothing new under the sun.
They're basically like, they're cheating. They're cheating by holding the pommel.
Francesco Loda wrote a book about the Roman school of rapier, which is what he practices, and I think in that it advocates having the pommel in the palm of your hand, like holding it in such a way that the pommel is in your palm. Which is not quite as bad as like the fingertips, but it's definitely not pommel all the way down here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like specifically, like you'll see like Destreza rapiers. Some of them just have different anatomy, right? Because they're more suited to whatever you're doing. So like Destreza rapiers have those really short grips, right? They're like 6 inches. Like my Tybalt, like this is a really short grip, right? It's barely, and the idea is that the pommel goes right here on your wrist, and it works. Whereas like Italian rapiers have longer grips. You've got like you have several different grip options and things like it's just the anatomy of whatever sort you have. I would say.
And to come back to my point about gripping, just ideally when you're learning like a style, like try to do what they tell you to do, and then once you've tried it, if it doesn't work for you, then try adjusting it.
Yeah.
Or use a different style of sword, and you can play around with that because that's historical. That's what they did.
Yeah, absolutely. Experimentation, I think, is something that in HEMA we need to get maybe a little bit more comfortable with, because just generally it's like, no, we must do the right way and only the right way. It's like, well, I'm not the first person.
Experimentation is.
Sorry, go ahead.
What got HEMA like started. I mean, you know, like back in the 90s, people were just like wanting to play around and figure things out and learn things and be nerds in the backyard. So
yeah. All right. So, do you want to talk really quickly about offhands, or should we close out the episode?
I think I would take a lot of offense to that conversation.
I mean, offhand, I can't really think of anything to say.
There's not much left to talk about.
Sure.
What's the point?
Oh no! It just keeps going. It just keeps going. It's never gonna stop.
You always have to keep your guard up, Colin.
I just can't. I can't. I can't. It's still going. All right. So
Not sharp enough?
let's talk.
We're gonna talk like 30 seconds to a minute about them.
Yeah, I mean, like they exist, and I think that like it's hard to talk about. I think it's hard to talk about rapier in general without the elephant in the room, which is, well, actually the real elephant in the room is silver, and we're completely skipping that. But the other thing is that in HEMA we always do, we always have rapier with almost always have rapier with an offhand weapon, and it's usually dagger, which is cool. But like, Yeah, it's like a thing. It's an extra little bit of reach for your left hand, and also a nice stabbing tool when somebody gets too close to you, which happens a lot. But yeah,
Much prefer rapier and dagger to single rapier, because the dagger allows me to make up for a vast disparity of skill that I don't have. So.
and see, like, so it's funny because I actually hate rapier and dagger because it's something else that I have to worry about. Whereas if I'm just doing hand parries, I'm fine with that. And having the extra dagger, not only do I have to worry about what mine is doing, I have to worry about what the other dude's dagger is doing, which is, to me, it's like, man.
So a lot of the sources tell you learn rapier alone first, and then learn rapier and dagger, although there's some exceptions. But in my experience, some people hate rapier and dagger at first, and some people hate rapier alone at first. So while I usually say you should start with just the rapier because there's less to think about, some people, rapier and dagger actually just clicks in their brain much better. So it might be better for them to start with that. But yeah, there's lots of different offhands. There's cloak, there's rotella,
Buckler,
lantern,
and for those of you who are in the SCA, my personal favorite offhand, the rubber band gun. So I picked this up. This is an bandguns.com or whatever is the guy. Man, this thing hits like a truck. I don't know how else to describe it. But yeah, that's definitely a cool offhand that doesn't see a lot of light of day in HEMA circles, but it's kind of fun.
If they're banned, how are you allowed to buy them?
Fired.
It's the perfect time to end the show. Now we're all banned. We're all banned. No Instagram, no Facebook. But yeah, I think that's a good place to end up. Is just like, hey, rapier is cool. You should try it.
If you want to learn more about the weapon itself, a really great place, like not how to fence with it, but just about historically about the weapon, a really great place to start is this book, which is The Rapier and Smallsword from 1460 to 1820 by A.V.B. Norman. It is a massive book. It has tons of information and examples of all sorts of different types of rapiers. It's also out of print, so you have to find it, and sometimes you can find it for cheap. Sometimes it's like $200. I think I got that one for like $40 or $50. But if you're interested in learning more about like the physical weapon itself and the different varieties out there, or if you're looking for like, hey, I want to get a custom rapier, so I want to look at a bunch of different types to get inspired, that's a fantastic resource.
Cool. All right. Well, I guess with that, we will say goodbye until next week. So guys, thanks as always for hanging out and chatting with me, the noob and terrible fencer. And I will see everybody next week.
All right.
Bye guys.
Bye.